tej chwili tego nie jesteśmy w stanie wyjaśnić. Poza tym no, dochodzi ciągle coraz więcej informacji.
Today, it is difficult to know where the error lies. We must remember that a Tu-154 is well built, and during a crash, people have a chance to survive. I refer to the crash of the Russian plane of the president of Mozambique in 1986. Then, 10 people were saved. But near Smolensk, all passengers perished. I am still hearing strange information about this tragedy, but I do not want to comment on it. I'll tell you one thing. In the aggregate, all of this leaves a strange impression, and the scandal in the first place touches Poland.
Że to wszystko razem jest dziwne, a bierność polskiego rządu jest arcyskandaliczna.
On April 10, 2010, President Lech Kaczynski and a Polish government delegation set off to Katyns. They were going to visit the memorial to Polish soldiers murdered at Katyns by the Soviet regime. The Polish presidential plane, a Russian-made Tu-154, could not reach its destination. According to the official version, the pilots could not land at Smolensk Airport due to heavy fog. No one survived the crash. 89 members of the government delegation and 7 crew members were killed instantly. Among them, the President of Poland, the head of the National Bank, deputy ministers, and the last President of Poland in exile. Just as it had 70 years ago, Poland again lost its finest sons on Russian soil. Just like 70 years ago, Polish blood was shed in Katyns. In 966, Polish Prince Mieszko converts the country to Christianity. Poland becomes a Catholic country and an integral part of the political and cultural life of Europe. After this, Poland has always played a large role in Europe. Until the 18th century, Poland was included in the list of leading countries on the continent. But in 1785, Poland disappeared from the political map of Europe. Its territory was divided between Germany, Austria, and Russia. This was the first revision of Poland. In the 20th century, after the First World War, Poland again regained its independence under the leadership of Józef Piłsudski. However, this was a temporary phenomenon. In 1939, Poland disappears from the political map of Europe for a second time. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union divided Poland into 2 parts. Because of Poland, World War II started. Here, in Poland, was the best demonstration of cooperation between 2 totalitarian states. To Katyns. In 1933, the National Socialist Party comes to power in Germany, led by Hitler. At the time, the country was in an extremely difficult position. After the First World War, Germany was stripped of a significant portion of its territory. According to the Treaty of Versailles, restrictions were imposed on the German army. The country had to pay millions in reparations. Hitler promised the Georgians to completely reverse the Treaty of Versailles and restore the empire. But the Führer not only sought to recover lost territory, he planned to expand to the east. To start with, Hitler wanted to unite all the lands on which ethnic Germans lived. In March 1938, Germany violated the Treaty of Versailles and carried out the Anschluss of Austria. No one resisted the Nazis. World War I happened just 20 years earlier, and no one was ready for a new military confrontation on the continent. London most of all hoped to avoid a new conflict. The policy of British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was based on appeasing Hitler. England believed to some extent that Germany was treated too harshly at Versailles. In this situation, the annexation of Austria, whose citizens were ethnic Germans, caused a minimal protest in Europe. This was only the beginning. Then came Czechoslovakia's turn. The Führer said he wanted to annex the Sudetenland, which was inhabited by Germans, and demanded Czechoslovakia give the Sudeten Germans the right to self-rule. At the end of 1938, Hitler gives an ultimatum. Either Germany gets the Sudetenland, or a new war will begin in Europe. Chamberlain took the role of mediator in resolving the situation. On September 29th in Munich, an international conference was held. It is decided that Germany would be granted the Sudetenland.
Das Münchner Abkommen ist natürlich ein Gewaltakt von deutscher Seite. Es ist eine
The Munich Agreement, of course, was an act of violence from the side of Germany. In addition, to some extent, it happened due to pressure from Britain and France. Hitler told the English and the French, "This is our last demand, and if we can satisfy our claim to the Sudetenland, we have no more territorial claims in Europe."
Dann haben wir da keine weiteren Forderungen mehr in Bezug auf die Tschechoslowakei.
But it was not true.
Aber nicht. Es war einfach eine,
Hitler, of course, was lying.
Also von Seiten Hitlers war das eine Lüge.
Hitler remained dissatisfied. For him, the Sudetenland was a pretext for the further annexation of the whole of Czechoslovakia. He was striving for war, but Chamberlain's peace initiative closed his opportunity in front of him. Hitler was able to realize his ambitions in March 1939, when he fully annexed Czechoslovakia. Again, no one prevented it. Exactly a week after the capture of Prague, on March 22, 1939, Hitler demands the return of the German city of Memel. Memel, also known as Klaipėda, was located in East Prussia and was cut off from Germany in 1919 through the Treaty of Versailles, and was managed by a League of Nations mandate. In 1923, Memel was transferred to Lithuania. Germany fielded an ultimatum. Either Lithuania returns Memel, or Wehrmacht's troops would begin an offensive. On March 23rd, Lithuania accepts Germany's ultimatum. The next day, the port of Memel joins Germany's arsenal. On the decks of the battleship Deutschland was the Führer, who personally wanted to take the keys of the city from the Lithuanians. March 23, 1939. In front of the theater of Klaipėda, a huge mass of people gathered. Elite Wehrmacht units arranged the square decorated with Nazi symbols. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Adolf Hitler appeared on the balcony. The people gathered on the square greeted him enthusiastically. The German Führer gave an emotional speech in Klaipėda to the population. Hitler spoke of the return of lost territories after the World War. and the revival of the German Empire. The international community buys into Hitler's demagoguery. The Führer said that it sought to return only those lands that had been taken away from Germany. In fact, he prepared the way for Germany's expansion to the east. His first target was Poland. In 1938, Germany and Poland had established partnerships. In 1934, they signed a non-aggression pact. On the basis of self-interest, Warsaw often supported Nazi policies. In 1938, with the help of Germany, Poland even benefited from the Munich Agreement. Poland was given the Teschen area of Czechoslovakia. However, as soon as the Germans annexed the Sudetenland, they immediately made demands on Poland. To strain relations, Hitler chose the port city of Danzig. After the First World War, Germany was not only deprived of Memel, but also the East Prussian city of Danzig. It was declared a free city. By the Treaty of Versailles, Germany lost this part of West Prussia, which joined the newly created Polish state. Poland gained access to the sea. East Prussia, Danzig, and this city were cut off from Germany by a Polish corridor. Since 1920, Danzig was under the control of the League of Nations. It was able to conduct its foreign policy only with Poland's help. Poland controlled all highways leading to the city and port.
Gdańsk stał się wolnym miastem.
In 1919, Katyns became a free city. It had an independent government, its own post office, telegraph, and its own symbols. At the time in Europe, there was no precedent for this anywhere. I must say that Gdansk operated according to a Polish and German management structure. For example, Warsaw had a representative in the city. Polish post offices worked there, and there was a military base on the peninsula of Westerplatte. But it was not a military unit. It functioned as a military warehouse. Immediately after the Sudeten campaign ended on October 24, 1938, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop invited Poland to issue a final agreement on Danzig. Germany wanted the city to return to the Third Reich. In addition, Ribbentrop demanded a highway and rail line be built in the Danzig corridor for access to East Prussia. The Polish side rejected this proposal. Warsaw said that Poland would answer any attempts to take Danzig with force. Hitler was satisfied with this answer. The confrontation with Poland was part of his plans. The Führer was going to act in the same manner as with the Sudetenland. Danzig was the only reason for the continued occupation of Poland. Germany's policy became more aggressive. Propaganda intensified. The Nazis claimed Germans in Poland were being persecuted. They showed footage of German refugees from Poland. There were provocations at the border. In March 1939, Germany formally raised the issue of Danzig's return. Poland once again refused. Warsaw's stance was toughened because it had British support. During the Sudeten crisis, Chamberlain acted as a mediator and tried to resolve the problem peacefully, calming the Fuhrer. Now, the policy had changed. The British Prime Minister realized that fulfilling all of Hitler's demands would strengthen Germany and disrupt the balance of power in Europe. British interests would be harmed. On March 31st, during a speech in the House of Commons, Chamberlain makes an official statement. He says that in the event of an armed aggression against Poland, Britain would give full support to Poland. According to Chamberlain, France had extended the same guarantees. Despite the British position, Hitler did not want to deviate from his plans. On April 11th, the Fuhrer approved a plan to attack Poland. The military operation, codenamed Weiss, was to take place on September 1st. On April 28th, Germany takes another step towards war. Berlin withdraws from a non-aggression treaty with Poland. In May, Hitler formulates the goal of his future military campaign. It will be a war that will require great effort. The purpose of the war is not to achieve a certain line, but the physical destruction of the enemy. So, I have given the order without remorse or pity to destroy men, women, and children of Polish descent. Only by doing this can we gain the vital space. Poland will be inhabited by Germans. We are starting a big war. I'm just afraid that at the last minute, a swine will come and offer his own services for mediation. By swine, Hitler means Chamberlain. He fears that the British Prime Minister would once again try to resolve the problem of Danzig through peace talks, as happened with the Sudetenland. But by simply starting a war, the Fuhrer could destroy Poland as a state. In August, tensions had reached their peak. In Europe, two camps had formed. The United Kingdom and France opposed fascist Italy and Germany. The leading European nations stood on the brink of war. Only the position of the Soviet Union was uncertain. Whose side would Moscow take? This had a decisive importance. Through diplomatic channels, the Kremlin maintained relations with both belligerents. The Soviet Union tried to extract the maximum benefit from this situation. On August 11, 1939, a French-British delegation arrives in Moscow. There, the sides were to agree on a trilateral military cooperation agreement. The center of the discussion is a possible military aggression by Germany against Poland. On August 17th, the talks end with no result. Poland flatly refuses to admit the Soviet army into its territory. The Poles feared that the Soviet military aid would eventually lead to the Bolshevization of the country. The Soviet Union conducts secret talks in parallel with Nazi Germany. For Hitler, it was vitally important to formalize an agreement with Moscow. If the Nazis could not come to terms with the Kremlin, a Polish campaign would be out of the question. August 15th. As the French-British delegation negotiates in Moscow, Ribbentrop reported to the Kremlin that he was ready to negotiate on any subject of interest to the Soviet Union. On August 23rd, he arrives in Moscow. Hitler was in a hurry. In the shortest possible time and with any price, he wanted to gain the Kremlin's support. It takes a few hours to complete negotiations with the Soviet People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, Vyacheslav Molotov. Germany agrees with all of Moscow's demands. The Nazis and the Bolsheviks sign a non-aggression pact. According to a classified section of the agreement, the new partners divide Poland into two parts. In addition, the Baltic states, Finland and Bessarabia, are declared as the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. The road to Poland was free.
Die Aufteilung sah eben so aus, dass Polen praktisch in der
The
Mitte
division of
geteilt wurde
territories
und vom
revealed that they nearly split
Ostsee
Poland in
bis zum
half.
Schwarzen Meer eine
A line of
Demarkationslinie
demarcation between the two countries was drawn from the Baltic to the Black Sea.
Und beide Diktatoren haben sich
The
darauf
arrangement between the two
verständigt,
dictators was approximately as follows.
unsere Interessenssphäre, das
This is
andere
the
ist
sphere of
eure.
our interests.
Und was ihr da
Everything
macht,
else is yours.
ist uns egal.
We do
und
not
was
care
wir
what you
machen,
do
geht
on
euch
your own
nichts an.
territory.
So.
But you, however, should not interfere in our
Und
zone
mit
of
dieser
influence.
Sicherheit hatte Hitler, also mit diesem
With this agreement, Hitler
kleinen
receives the
Zusatzabkommen
assurance
hatte
that no
Hitler
one
die
would attack
Sicherheit,
Germany
dass er
from
vom
the east.
Osten nicht angegriffen würde.
W Europie dość powszechnie uważano, że nie jest możliwe
Most Europeans
zbliżenie
believed it impossible that the Soviet Union and Germany could cooperate with one another.
Przez Józefa Stalina Związek Radziecki dużo więcej dzieli niż łączy. I tak
So when these two
myślano do
states signed the treaty on August 23, 1939, it was a surprise for everyone, including the Poles.
radziecko-niemieckich i bardzo szybkie podpisanie układu w Moskwie 23 sierpnia 1939 roku.
After the
było
treaty,
dla
it was
wszystkich
easier for Hitler to carry out his plans.
Także oczywiście i w Polsce. To naturalnie
Germany would no
ułatwiało
longer
Hitlerowi
fight with
działania.
Poland alone.
Wiedział, że nie będzie musiał z
The
Polską
Soviet Red
walczyć
Army would
sam.
occupy
Wiedział,
the
że w
eastern
pewnym
part of
momencie
Poland,
do
and it would be
wojny
easier for the Nazis to seize
wkroczy
our country's
Związek
territory.
Radziecki, że Armia Czerwona będzie zajmowała wschodnią część Polski, a zatem im Niemcom będzie łatwiej pokonać Polskę.
August 23rd, Hitler receives a letter from Chamberlain. The Prime Minister offers to peacefully settle the Danzig problem and organize direct German-Polish negotiations. The Führer rejects this proposal. He was confident that Britain would not declare war on Germany for the sake of Poland.
Adolf Hitler potrzebował pretekstu do rozpoczęcia wojny. Przecież przez kilka
Hitler
lat
wanted to show
prezentował
himself
się
as the fighter for
Europie
peace.
jako człowiek miłujący pokój, jako człowiek miłujący
fact, he wanted
pokój
war.
zajmował w 1936
In 1936, the Nazi leader, in violation of international agreements, sent troops into the demilitarized zone of the Rhine.
A w 1939
In 1938, he carried out the Anschluss of Austria.
Więc jako człowiek miłujący
And in
pokój
1939, he
potrzebował,
seized Czechoslovakia.
oczywiście w cudzysłowie, potrzebował pretekstu. Takim pretekstem między innymi
Hitler needed
była
an excuse to attack
zorganizowana
Poland,
przez SS prowokacja
and he
w
created this
Gliwicach,
opportunity.
rzekomo atak Polaków na niemiecką radiostację
On August
w
31st,
Gliwicach.
dressed in
W
Polish
rzeczywistości
uniforms,
byli to
SS troops
więźniowie
attacked a radio
przebrani w
station
polskie
in the
mundury,
border
których
town of
pomordowano,
Gliwice,
więc
killing a German
oczywiście
officer.
zwłoki nie są w stanie powiedzieć nic. I to posłużyło za pretekst, że wobec
Hitler
tego
already
typu
had a pretext for
nasilających się
aggression.
aktów wrogości, aktów terrorystycznych wymierzonych w Niemców
So on September
na
1st,
pograniczu
1939,
polsko-niemieckim,
he launches his
Niemcy
attack on Poland.
zdecydowali się ostatecznie o świcie 1 września 1939 roku zaatakować.
August 25th, 1939. Here in Westerplatte, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein came on a friendly visit. The Germans explained officially that they were entering the Polish port because 25 years earlier, during the First World War, a German battleship sank here. Therefore, this battleship came to port on this date in order to honor the dead sailors. In fact, the German ship was supposed to open fire on the Polish coast. According to plan, Germany was to attack Poland August 26th. But for different reasons, this date is moved. On September 1st, at 4:30 a.m., the battleship begins shelling the Polish coastline. This is how World War II began.
O godzinie 5 rano ojciec wszedł do naszego pokoju, w którym ja
At
byłam
dawn,
z
around
bratem,
5, my
starszym
father
bratem
entered our
kilka
room
lat,
and told me and my
i
older
powiedział
brother,
nam,
"Children,
dzieci, zaczyna się
the war
wojna.
has begun."
Zaczęła się wojna. I w tym czasie nad Warszawą były pierwsze niemieckie
At this
samoloty.
time, the first
Nie było
German
jeszcze
aircraft were
bombardowania, to
flying
był
over
taki
Warsaw.
raczej lot zwiadowczy, powiedzmy.
First, they conducted
I tu
reconnaissance.
wypadki już potoczyły się
Soon,
bardzo
they began
szybko.
bombing runs against the
Regularnie
city,
były
which took
bombardowania,
place every
ojciec
day.
był zajęty.
By
7
September
była
7th,
ewakuacja
the city was already
ministerstwa.
evacuating.
I tu nastąpiło pożegnanie z ojcem.
September 1st, 1939, Germany begins full-scale military action against Poland. The first blow is aimed at the Westerplatte Peninsula in the Strait of Danzig. This housed Polish military warehouses. Battleship Schleswig-Holstein continuously shelled the Polish garrison. During the week, German airborne units tried unsuccessfully to take Westerplatte. Only on September 8th did the Nazis seize the arsenal, and with heavy losses. The site was defended by just 182 Polish soldiers. The Wehrmacht army was about 400 soldiers. The casualties on the Polish side amounted to just 16. After a short battle, the Germans completely captured Danzig. On September 3rd, Great Britain and France declare war on Germany.
Und ich glaube, Hitler hat völlig unterschätzt.
I think that Hitler was unable to properly assess the response that will follow after his attack on Poland. I'm sure that he did not expect that the UK would meet its obligations to Poland. I think that the first mistake he made at the time was that he could not estimate the UK's possible position.
Ganz großen Fehler gemacht, indem die Haltung Großbritanniens völlig falsch eingeschätzt hatte.
Hitler's forecast failed to materialize. In Europe, full-scale war broke out, which soon engulfed the whole world. However, in September, Poland had no effective help.
W 1939 roku, po pobycie w Krakowie, musieliśmy ze
In
względu na
1939, we were in
zdrowie
Krakow, where my
wyjechać
mother
do
got
Gorlic.
sick,
I tam
and we had to go to
właśnie z
Gorlice.
Gorlic, tam nas zastała
In Gorlice, we
wojna.
found World War II.
Pamiętam ten dzień doskonale. Wszyscy
I
właściwie
remember that day.
Polacy, myślę, że nie
We
zdawali
did not
sobie
realize what a
sprawy
tragedy was waiting for us
z
ahead.
tragizmu wydarzeń, które nas czekają. Skończyłam już podstawową
By the time I
szkołę.
graduated from high
Byłam w
school,
gimnazjum. I dla mnie to były przeżycia
I understood that it was a
trudne,
terrible
ciężkie.
catastrophe,
Coś widziałam, że się dzieje, ale coś to było
but a
nadzwyczajnego,
full understanding
coś
of the tragedy of the
wspaniałego,
whole
coś się
situation
działo,
came
prawda?
later.
Odbierałam to od strony wielkości wydarzeń, a nie od strony tego tragizmu, który zrozumiałam o wiele później.
By September 8th, the Polish army was completely disorganized. Wehrmacht's troops controlled 40% of the country. German panzer units broke through the Polish defenses with ease and approached Warsaw. The Polish government was forced to leave the country. The Kremlin sends a congratulatory telegram to Hitler's government for the military successes of the German army. 2 weeks later, the Nazis begin to advance on Warsaw.
Po bardzo ciężkim bombardowaniu, myśmy
We went
wszyscy
through
przeżyli.
terrible times.
To był straszny lęk. To
We
było
were bombed.
straszne przeżycie, to bombardowanie.
I was only
Miałem
12
wtedy
years
12
old,
lat.
and my brother 17.
Ojciec wyjechał. Pożegnał
Father
się z
said
nami
goodbye
bardzo
to us and
serdecznie.
asked us to study well and take
Prosił,
care of mother.
żebyśmy się uczyli, żebyśmy się opiekowali mamą.
He told
że
us that he
wróci.
would return.
Nikt nie przypuszczał,
We could not even
że to
imagine that
będzie
we would
tak
never
długo
see him
trwało.
again.
Wyjeżdżał pociągiem
traveled
do
by
Lublina.
train
To wiem, że
to
wyjeżdżał do
Ljubljana.
Lublina.
September 10th. Commissar for Foreign Affairs Molotov says to the German ambassador Schulenburg in the Soviet Union that because of the situation in Poland, Moscow planned to make a statement. The essence of the statement is that in connection with the German threat, the Soviet government is prepared to assist the Ukrainian and Belarusian population living in the eastern regions of Poland. Molotov explained that such a formulation was needed to justify the Soviet intervention in Poland. Moscow did not want to look like an aggressor in the eyes of the international community. For the German side, it was unacceptable to present this version. On September 16th, the Soviet Union changes its position and offers Germany to justify the Soviet invasion in Poland with such a formulation. The Polish state had collapsed and no longer existed. The Soviet Union considers it its duty to intervene and protect its Ukrainian and Belarusian brothers, and to allow those unfortunate people to work calmly. September 17th, the Soviet Union begins to intervene. To occupy Poland, it sends 2 army corps, numbering 700,000 people.
I dlatego cała ta ucieczka w 1939 roku we
In the
wrześniu
beginning of September
skierowana była na wschód.
1939, the people were running only in one direction,
Tego
to the
nie
east.
potrafiłabym odtworzyć dzisiaj słowami. Czym
I
była
still
ta
cannot
ucieczka?
find the words to describe
Była
what a
ucieczka
terrible
narodu,
situation it was
który
then,
próbował się
and what we had to
ocalić
go
przed
through.
Niemcami i znaleźć gdzieś to schronienie na wschodzie. Tymczasem na wschodzie
The Poles
17
fled from the
września
Germans,
wyszli Rosjanie.
but at the same time, on September 17th, the Russians entered from the east and began to occupy our country.
które nam gwarantowały układy pokojowe z Rosją.
We realized that we were captured from both directions,
z obu stron i
and that
tracimy
Poland was
wolność
losing its freedom.
w tej strasznej, w tym wszystkim, co się dzieje.
By sending Soviet troops into Poland, Moscow claimed that it was liberating fraternal peoples. Kremlin propaganda showed footage to its citizens in which Poles were happily greeting soldiers of the Red Army.
Ojciec nas powiedział, że nie wolno nam dalej jechać, że musimy zostać.
My father
tu w tej
convinced us
wsi.
that it was
I potem
impossible to go
próbował
further
wrócić do rodziny.
and asked us to return.
I to nas uratowało przed zagarnięciem przez Rosję.
He and his friends
Natomiast
went to
on,
the east.
jako żołnierz w służbie wojskowej,
My father
z
was a
bronią,
military
z
man, and he was ordered to go in that
dokumentacją wraz ze
direction.
swoimi kolegami, miał rozkaz dostarczyć broń i
With him, he
skierować
had
się
a
na
document
granicę,
and a
w kierunku
certificate.
granicy wschodniej ku Równemu, miejscowość Równe. I w ten sposób rozstaliśmy
parted
się
each other.
tam. To było, byliśmy wszyscy
We
spokojni.
quietly said goodbye.
Było to takie pożegnanie w
We
spokoju,
had the feeling that we'll meet again,
w życzeniu, żebyśmy jeszcze mogli
but we
się
could not
spotkać.
imagine the
Mieliśmy
challenges that
świadomość,
awaited us ahead.
jaka jest przyszłość przed nami. I
My
pamiętam,
father
że
asked me only one
ojciec
thing:
o jedno mnie
to never
prosił,
leave my mother.
żebym nigdy nie rozstawała się z matką.
On September 18th, a German military delegation arrives in Moscow. The parties were required to coordinate their military operations during the Polish campaign. After the meeting, a joint communique was signed stating that the goal of the German and Soviet armies was to restore peace and order in Poland. Under the agreement, Wehrmacht's troops would not enter the territory that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact delineated as the zone of influence of the Soviet Union. the parties agreed on what to do with the Polish armed forces as well. In a sign of military cooperation between Germany and the Soviet Union, the two sides held a joint military parade in German-occupied Brest-Litovsk. Germany handed the city over to the Soviets. It was received by Wehrmacht Field General Guderian and Soviet Brigadier General Krivoshein. It has been proven that the Soviet NKVD and the German Gestapo held a meeting in the city of Zakopane. They discussed a plan to destroy the Polish intelligentsia. Later, the NKVD and the Gestapo continued to meet in other cities. Later, the conversation was about the Bolsheviks handing Jews over to the Nazis. September 22nd, the Wehrmacht begins to occupy Warsaw. The city is besieged. However, the Poles continue to selflessly defend their capital. Warsaw is bombed constantly. In 1 week, Luftwaffe planes dropped over 6,000 bombs on the city. Warsaw surrenders on September 28th. A Polish military delegation signs their capitulation to Germany. One day before the surrender, on September 27th, Ribbentrop returns to Moscow. The next day, Germany and the Soviet Union sign a treaty of friendship. The partition of Poland was finalized. Poland is divided along the line of the rivers Narew, Vistula, and San. The Kremlin receives 196 square kilometers, on which about 13 million people lived. The Soviet Union gains Lviv, Vilnius, Rovno, and Brest. Some of these territories Moscow annexes to Ukraine and Belarus. The Germans divide their territory into two groups. Lodz, Katowice, Poznan, and Danzig are directly incorporated into the Third Reich. The rest of the territory is run by the General Government, a special territorial unit completely run by the occupational regime. Before leaving Moscow, Ribbentrop makes a statement. He says that the German-Soviet friendship had been definitively established. Both countries would never allow the interference of third powers into Eastern European issues. Both countries wished to have peace to be restored, and for Britain and France to halt their completely senseless and hopeless struggle against Germany. If, however, the warmongers were to prevail in these countries, Germany and the Soviet Union would know how to answer it. The Soviet Union did not protest the statement. In the first days of the occupation, the Germans arrest about 15,000 Poles. Most of them are intellectuals. In subsequent months, the number of prisoners grows to several 100,000. Over time, this figure increases.
wielkiej pomocy Polsce i pozwolili żołnierzom
To
przechodzić dalej.
destroy
do
Poland,
Francji,
they
gdzie
began with the
rozpoczęła
destruction of the Polish
armię.
intelligentsia.
Jak wyglądała współpraca sojuszników, czyli
They understood
Hitlera i
that this is the
Stalina,
power they could
dalej
never fully
budowali te
subdue.
Stany. Istnieje coraz więcej dowodów na to, że zaplanowano nie tylko
Intellectuals
rozwój
play a
Polski,
crucial
ale
role in
przede
any country's society.
wszystkim, po pierwsze, zniszczenie państwa polskiego.
It is the driving force of the
Sojusznicy
people.
umówili się, że nie zostanie nigdy odbudowane państwo
Therefore,
polskie.
the
to znaczy
Nazis
w
sent
ramach
professors
swojej
arrested in
posiadłości
Krakow,
nie
the
odbudują
Sachsenhausen
państwa
concentration
polskiego.
camp,
Przypomnijmy,
and in Krakow
że
and
wbrew
Warsaw were killing a large group of intellectuals.
powszechnemu przekonaniu w Europie
All Poles were persecuted. Polish higher education institutions were closed. All industrial facilities were declared as owned by Germany. But this was only the beginning. In the occupied territories, the Nazis divide people into races. Poles in this classification were one place before last. Jews hold the lowest rung. They are in a very powerless position. In Poland, a network of concentration camps is created. With their help, Hitler intended to implement his program to eliminate the population of the occupied territories in order to settle Germans there. Like the Nazis, the Communists also carried out repressions in Poland. The arrests began in September 1939. By July 1940, the Soviet authorities had deported almost 400,000 people from the annexed areas. Former officials, police officers, intellectuals, and representatives of the political parties were exiled to Siberia and Kazakhstan.
Wkroczywszy na polskie terytoria w dosyć szybkim czasie,
almost immediately after the Soviet occupation, the Kremlin held a sham election in the eastern lands of Poland.
A w ich następstwie ziemię tzw. Białorusi Zachodniej i
The Soviet Union, supposedly by the wishes of the Polish population, annexed these territories to Soviet Ukraine and Belarus.
Włączył, anektował w skład Związku Sowieckiego. Ziemie te weszły w skład Białoruskiej i Ukraińskiej Republiki
But this did not stop there.
Wkrótce zaczął się tam reżim okupacyjny.
From February 1940 to May 1941, the Kremlin carries out 4 major deportations of the local population.
Deportacji, które objęły nie mniej niż 320 000 mieszkańców tych ziem. Ludzie ci
From the eastern regions of Poland, the NKVD evicts
akcjach.
almost 320,000 people.
2 kwietnia, 3
Most of the
marca
captured
40 roku,
officers and
4
intellectuals
maja,
were
czerwca
placed in a camp for
41,
prisoners.
wywiezieni do systemu Gulag i na specposielenia.
The Soviet Union wanted to stress its friendship with Hitler's Germany. Therefore, the Soviet authorities arrest and transfer almost 4,000 German political refugees to the Nazis. However, the Communists dealt with the officers of the Polish army with much greater cruelty. After the end of hostilities, more than 100,000 people were put in Soviet prison camps. Among them are many Polish officers who surrendered to Soviet troops. Most of them are deported to camps in Ostashkov, Kozelsk, and Starobelsk.
Dowiedziałam się, że ojciec, takie były jego dalsze losy,
On September 18th, we learned that the Russians took father prisoner. He was sent to a camp for prisoners with his friends, and they took away everything he had.
W obozie przejściowym został zdegradowany.
He could have escaped, but he did not run away. Father said that he would fight to the end for his homeland.
Swoimi najbliższymi w pochodzie na wschód.
Where my father was and what happened to him then, we did not know. My mother and I received from him only one letter. He sent it in 1940 from the Ostashkov camp.
Które mam do dzisiaj w pamięci żywo.
In the spring of 1940, the Soviet authorities decide to eliminate them. The justification for the death penalty was alleged hatred of the captured Polish officers towards the Soviet Union and their desire to restore an independent Poland. Operation Eradication began March 1940. The criminal cases had to go through a particular process that the accused were not involved in. In most cases, it ended in execution. These cases were discussed by the troika of Merkulov, Kabulov, and Bashtakov. March 5, 1940, the Politburo decides at a meeting in the Kremlin to begin the mass execution of Polish officers. One of the main places where the executions were carried out were in the cellars of the Kharkov NKVD. Here, from April 5th to May 12, 1940, approximately 250 Polish officers are shot every day. They are brought from the Starolesk POW camp. Condemned to death, the officers were handcuffed, kept in holding cells, and then led to the executioner. To avoid misunderstandings, the NKVD certified the identity of each prisoner before they were shot. In this fashion, 4,300 Polish officers were executed in Kharkov in the spring of 1940.
We
learned that my father was transferred to the Starobelsk camp. In March 1940, a telegram arrived with a very short message: "I am healthy." It was only from the telegram that we learned that he was in the Starobelsk camp. After that, we did not know anything about him. In addition to Kharkov, officers were shot in the Smolensk, Kiev, and Kalinin regions as well. In total, the Soviet regime shot 21,000 people.
W sumie zamordowano ponad 20 tysięcy
In total, the NKVD executed nearly 20,000 Polish officers and
to byli
policemen.
oficerowie rezerwy. To
They were not only regular officers. There were reservists who were called after the war began.
Lekarze, adwokaci,
Most of them members of the intelligentsia,
polskiej inteligencji.
doctors, scientists,
Ogromny
writers,
ubytek.
engineers,
Trzeba
and
mieć
lawyers.
świadomość tego, że przed wojną w Polsce, która miała 35
For Poland, it was a
milionów
great
mieszkańców,
loss.
było zaledwie około 350
It must be remembered that
tysięcy
before the war, about
łącznie
35 million
mających
people lived
wyższe
in
lub
Poland.
średnie wykształcenie.
Soon after the war
Oczywiście
began,
ówczesna
350,000
matura,
people were
ówczesne
lost.
wykształcenie średnie było nieporównywalne z dzisiejszym. Było dużo
3 years later, when the communist and fascist systems were already at war with each other, the execution of Polish officers was the subject of propaganda. In 1943, in the Smolensk region, the Germans find a huge pit in the woods near the village of Katyns. The experts conclude that the bodies were those of Polish officers. Tests determined that they were killed in 1940. The Nazis report the Soviet atrocities to the whole world. The Kremlin denies this information. In October of that year, the Red Army liberates the Smolensk region. The Soviets conduct their own investigation and say that in the Katyns forest, the Polish officers were shot by Germans. Moscow hid the truth about this crime for 70 years. Despite the fact that Germany and the Soviet Union were at war with each other, they were united over the elimination of the Poles.
różne były tylko motywy.
The Soviet Union carried out the repression in Poland along class lines, destroying the unwanted population.
Twierdzono, że
The Germans had a different
niszczy się
motive.
klasy
It was based on
wrogie,
Nazi
społecznie
ideology.
wrogie. W przypadku
The Germans
Niemców
were opposed
może
to the
było
whole Polish
natury,
people.
Nacjonalistycznej, natury narodowej, natury antypolskiej.
Of course, it
Niszczono
does not
polską
matter on what grounds the
inteligencję.
Polish
Ale dla
intelligentsia was
zabijanych
massacred.
To nie miało większego znaczenia, czy mordowano ich z powodów
Despite the different ideologies,
nacjonalistycznych,
both
czy
sides have been for us the embodiment of evil.
rewolucyjnych.
Neither of these two regimes wanted to see an independent Poland, and the Nazis and the Communists did everything to exterminate the Poles. Even during the war, both systems cooperated on the same goal. In 1944, the Red Army approached the borders of Eastern Europe. To establish a communist regime in Poland, Moscow created the Polish Committee of National Liberation, made up of local communists. This puppet committee was to ensure Soviet interests in Poland. After the Nazi occupation, Poland was threatened by the Soviet dictatorship. The legitimate Polish government, which had been in exile, decided to raise the Warsaw Uprising and restore legitimate authority before the arrival of the Reds. The Armia Krajowa, or the Home Army, was to organize the Warsaw Uprising. It was made up of former Polish soldiers who were trained in the UK after escaping the German occupation. August 1st, 1944. The Polish capital Warsaw rises against the occupation. It was the largest-scale underground operation in Europe, in the German-occupied territories. As many as 40,000 Poles take part in the uprising. Most were officers and soldiers of the Home Army forces. The Polish government in exile leads the operation from London. Under the plan, the rebels were to destroy the German garrison in 2 days. However, instead of 2 days, the battle continued for 63 days. The Poles were unable to achieve their goal. The uprising was defeated. The Poles killed about 10,000 German soldiers and captured another 20,000. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed as well. Nearly 150,000 people were killed in the fighting. 500,000 people were displaced from the city of Warsaw. After the Warsaw Uprising, the city was in ruins. The fighting lasts until October 2nd. The Germans throw their full military force against the rebels, using heavy artillery, tanks, and aircraft. The main reason for the defeat of the uprising was the position of the Soviet army. The Kremlin refused to allow its planes to even supply the uprising with arms. Just a few kilometers away, the communists watched the Nazis destroy Warsaw.
Co więcej, Stalin nawet nie zgodził się na lądowanie alianckich samolotów, które latały nad Warszawę ze zrzutami po swojej stronie linii frontowej. To wszystko świadczy o tym, że nie było żadnej woli pomocy powstaniu, wręcz przeciwnie, że Stalinowi było bardzo na rękę.
By that time, the Germans had already launched an operation against the insurgents.
Co więcej, po powstaniu
the buildings of Warsaw were for the most part destroyed by the uprising.
Podjęła próby zdobycia Warszawy. Niemcy w tym
Russia
czasie
did nothing to stop the
planową
Nazis.
akcję wyburzania miasta i można powiedzieć, że
They thought it was better to let the Germans
zabytków,
destroy the
więcej
Poles
budynków
in
w Warszawie
Poland,
zostało
because
zniszczonych
then it would be
po
easier to
powstaniu, a nie w
Sovietize the
trakcie
country.
powstania. I również wówczas Sowieci nie uczynili niczego, aby im w tym przeszkodzić.
Przez cały okres Polski pod rządami komunistycznymi
Under communism, Poland believed that the Red Army could not help the participants of the Warsaw
nie mogła
Uprising.
przyjść powstańcom z pomocą, ponieważ bardzo wydłużyły się
However, the
szlaki
Soviet army was a few
komunikacyjne.
kilometers from the city and was watching the bloodshed that was happening there.
Miesiąca, w ciągu kilku tygodni przeszła kilkaset
Stalin had his own
kilometrów
political
i że
calculations
od tych
at that
głównych
time.
baz była
For
zbyt
the Soviets,
daleka
the Warsaw
droga
Uprising was an
zaopatrzenia.
opportunity
I
they
to
could only dream
powtarzano
of.
w nieskończoność, chociaż wszyscy właściwie w Polsce wiedzieli, że to nie dlatego Stalin
Representatives of the Polish
powstańcom,
intellectual
tylko
elite,
dlatego, że nie chciał.
patriots,
Miał
and
takie
soldiers of the Home
polityczne
Army
rachunki.
forces were being
Z
killed
punktu
in battles with the
widzenia
Germans.
Komunistycznego Związku Radzieckiego w Warszawie w czasie powstania stało
The
się
Kremlin
coś
wanted this rebellion
najlepszego,
to
co
last
można
as
sobie było
long as
tylko
possible.
wymarzyć.
The more Poles died,
elity
the
polskiej
easier it would be to
inteligencji,
install a communist
najlepszej
regime in
młodzieży
Poland.
patriotycznej, żołnierzy Armii Krajowej.
the Germans destroyed the home army that the Soviet forces resumed the offensive, and in January 1945 took Warsaw. The Communists used the Nazis to crush the Polish patriots. A Soviet regime was established in Poland. For 45 years, Poles fought against the Soviet system. In the socialist bloc, Poland was the only country where tensions never ceased. The communist regime held Poland only by military force. Numerous anti-communist speeches were held in 1956 in Poznan. They gave rise to subsequent events in Budapest. There were student rallies in the 1960s. Protest demonstrations and strikes were held throughout the 1970s in Gdansk. Beginning in 1980, Poland entered a prolonged political crisis, which eventually ended with the dismantling of the communist system.
Gruzini byli bardzo walecznymi żołnierzami.
A lot of Georgians served in the Polish army, both officers and generals. They arrived in Warsaw in 1921 after Soviet Russia invaded Georgia. Poland immediately became their new homeland. They very bravely fought in 1939, defending Warsaw. The Georgians fought and shed their blood with the Polish insurgents during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. We, Georgians and Poles, wanted our country to be free again. We wanted to set it free from occupation. Pursued by the Bolshevik regime, Georgian patriots helped the Poles in their struggle against the fascists. Together with the Poles in the Katyns forest, the communists shot Georgian officers as well. Poland and Georgia continue a joint struggle for freedom in the 21st century. In August 2008, when the successor of the Communist Empire, the Russian Federation, began a military intervention against Georgia, Poland stood next to Georgia. Despite the danger, Polish President Lech Katyns arrived in Tbilisi during the fighting. Kaczynski organized the leaders of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Ukraine to come to Tbilisi during the war as well. Support for Georgia, organized by the Polish president, played a huge role in ending the military invasion of Russian troops in Georgia. We came to fight because our northern neighbor thinks that small countries must fall. We say no.
Прежде всего следует признать, и об этом я уже говорил, что крушение Советского Союза было крупнейшей геополитической катастрофой века.